In 1930, an old man in a coal town had three ways his life could end. He could work until his body gave out and he died on the job. He could move in with his grown children and hope they could afford one more mouth at the table. Or, if he had no children and no savings and no strength left, he could be carried to the poorhouse to wait for the end among strangers. There was no fourth option. There was no monthly check waiting for him, no account with his name on it, no plan. The idea that a person had earned the right to simply stop working and live out their final years in peace did not exist for most of American history. It had to be invented. And the strange, accidental way it finally arrived tells you almost everything about why your retirement today rests so completely on your own shoulders. Right now, more than 60 million Americans put a piece of every paycheck into a 401k. It is so woven into how people picture growing old that most assume it has always been there, like some permanent feature of the country. But the 401k did not exist until 1978, and no one actually used one until 1980. That means the people who raised you and the people who raised them grew old in a completely different world. A world with no employer match, no target date fund, no account to roll over. So if none of that existed, how did people retire at all? The honest answer is darker than most people expect. And it explains how the risk of growing old quietly moved off the shoulders of companies and the government and landed squarely on yours. Go back far enough and the truth is blunt. Across almost the entire span of human history, retirement was not a stage of life at all. You worked until you could not, and then you leaned on your family, or you did without. In the year 1900, life expectancy in the United States was only about 47 years. Most people simply did not live long enough to face the question of what to do when they were too old to work. The ones who did were expected to be absorbed back into their families, the way they always had been on the farm, where an aging parent still had a place and a purpose, and grandchildren close enough to help. Then the country changed underneath them. As America turned from a nation of farms into a nation of factories in the late 1800s, that safety net of family and land came apart. Children moved to cities for work, families scattered, and an old man in a rented room in a factory town could not fall back on a farm that no longer existed. For those with nowhere to go, there was the poorhouse. Almost every county had one. They were called poor farms or almshouses, and they were where the country put the people it had no other plan for: the old, the sick, the disabled, the destitute, all housed together in conditions that ranged from grim to genuinely cruel. To end your life in the poorhouse was the great shared fear of the working poor, and for a huge share of the elderly, it was not a fear, it was the plan. Records from those places are hard to read even now. Families were often separated at the door. The food was thin. The winters were cold, and a person who went in rarely came back out. To be sent to the poor farm was to be marked as someone the world had given up on, and everyone in the working class understood exactly what it meant. It was the ending they spent their whole lives trying to outrun. There was one striking exception, and it came from the government, but only for a chosen few. After the Civil War, the United States began paying pensions to Union veterans and their widows, and that system swelled into something enormous. By the 1890s, those veteran pensions had become the single largest expense in the entire federal budget, at times swallowing more than a third of all federal spending. It quietly proved something that would matter enormously later, that a government could in fact pay people to grow old in dignity, but it was reserved for those who had worn the uniform on the winning side. For everyone else, old age stayed a private problem, with no public answer. Into that bleak picture came an idea that felt almost radical. What if a company could promise to take care of you after your working years were done? In 1875, the American Express Company created what is generally recognized as the first private pension plan in the United States. The railroads, the largest and most powerful companies of the age, followed. And slowly, over the first half of the 20th century, the pension became the great promise of American working life. Understand exactly what that promise was, because it is the heart of this whole story. A traditional pension is what is called a defined benefit. The company guaranteed you a specific monthly check for the rest of your life, based on your salary and the years you gave them. You did not have to choose investments. You did not have to guess how long you would live or how the market would behave. The company carried all of that weight. All you had to do was show up, do the work, and stay long enough to earn it. For a few decades, for millions of workers, it actually worked. A man could give a company 30 years, walk out the door, and collect a check every month until he died, and his widow often kept collecting after him. It was the closest thing to security the American worker had ever known. For the people who lived inside that promise, it shaped everything. You could plan a life around it. You could buy a home, knowing a check would still arrive after the paycheck stopped. You could tell your family that when the work was finally done, you would all be provided for. A whole culture of loyalty grew up around it. The belief that if you gave a company your best years, it would carry you through your last ones. That unspoken deal, work hard and stay loyal, and you will be taken care of, sat at the very center of what people once meant by a good job. But a promise is only ever as strong as the one making it. And in 1963, in South Bend, Indiana, the country learned exactly how fragile that promise could be. The Studebaker Automobile Company, once a proud giant, was failing. That December, it closed its main plant. And when it shut the doors, it terminated the pension plan its workers had been counting on for their entire lives. What happened next is the moment that should have warned everyone. The oldest workers, the ones already retired, received their full pensions. But roughly 4,000 workers in their 40s and 50s, men who had given the company decades, received only about 15 cents on the dollar of what they had been promised. And thousands of younger workers walked away with nothing at all. Their retirement, the thing they had traded their working lives for, simply evaporated the day the company decided it could no longer pay. These were not careless people. They were not gamblers. They had done everything right, everything they were told to do. They stayed loyal. They worked hard. They trusted the promise. And the promise still vanished, because it had always depended entirely on the health and the honesty of the company holding it. It was the first great crack in the promise, and it would not be the last. In the years that followed, more companies would stumble, more plans would come up short, and the lesson would settle in slowly and painfully. A pension was only ever a promise, and a promise can be broken by anyone desperate enough, or gone enough, to break it. Studebaker became a symbol, and it forced Washington to act. In 1974, Congress passed a sweeping law known as ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. It set rules for how pensions had to be funded. It created protections so that a worker who put in the years actually got to keep what they earned. And it set up a government backstop to catch some of the pensions that failed. It was a real and serious attempt to make the promise trustworthy again. But the ground was already shifting under everyone's feet, and the thing that would replace the pension was about to arrive almost entirely by accident. In 1978, Congress passed a large tax bill called the Revenue Act. Buried inside it was a small, dry provision, barely a page, numbered Section 401k. Its purpose was narrow and unglamorous. It was meant to clarify the tax treatment of certain deferred compensation, mostly for executives setting aside bonuses. Almost no one who voted for it imagined it would touch the life of an ordinary worker. It was a footnote. Then a benefits consultant named Ted Benna read that footnote differently than anyone else had. In 1980 and 81, Benna took that narrow provision and gave it what he himself called an aggressive interpretation. He realized the language could be read to allow something new. A regular employee could take a slice of their own paycheck before tax and set it aside into an investment account of their own. And then Benna added the one piece that would change everything, a piece Congress had never written into the law at all. He proposed that the employer put in matching money alongside whatever the worker saved. Benna built the first working version of this plan for his own consulting firm at the start of the 1980s, and even he was nervous about it. He worried that the government would look at what he had done, decide it reached far beyond anything Congress had intended, and shut the whole thing down. For a while, it was genuinely uncertain whether this quiet reinterpretation of a tax footnote would survive at all. Instead, the opposite happened. The government blessed it, other companies took notice, and a tool that almost no one had asked for began spreading across corporate America faster than anyone had imagined. That match was the spark. It turned a dusty tax clause into the most powerful savings tool the American worker had ever been handed, and companies began adopting it fast. On paper, it looked like a gift. Free money from your employer, tax breaks from the government, an account with your own name on it that no failing company could terminate the way Studebaker had. But look closer at what actually happened, because this is the quiet turn the whole story was building toward. The 401k was never designed to replace the pension. It was meant to sit on top of it, a little extra on the side. Companies, though, saw something the workers did not. A pension was a promise the company had to keep for decades, a heavy and unpredictable weight on its books. A 401k was not a promise at all. The company put in its match, and after that, its job was done. Whatever happened next was on you. So over the following decades, one company after another quietly closed its pension to new workers and pointed them toward a 401k instead. And in doing so, the entire risk of growing old was transferred. It moved off the shoulders of the corporation and onto the shoulders of the individual, one worker at a time. Usually without that worker ever being told that was what was happening. The scale of that quiet handoff is staggering when you lay it out plainly. Around 1980, close to 2 out of every 5 private sector workers could count on a traditional pension. Within a single generation, that share had collapsed toward roughly 1 in 7, while the 401k and plans like it became the default for nearly everyone else. An entire model of growing old, the one that had built and defined the American middle class, was dismantled and replaced in the span of a few decades, mostly quietly, and mostly without a vote that ordinary people ever felt they had a hand in. Think about everything that shift really moved onto you. Under the old pension, the company decided how much to save and carried the danger of a bad market. Under a 401k, you decide how much to put in, and if you put in too little, that is your problem. You choose the investments, and if you choose badly, that is your loss. You have to guess how long you will live, and if you run out of money at 85, no one is sending another check. The company promised nothing beyond its match. The government guarantees you almost nothing beyond a modest Social Security floor. Everything above that floor is now a test that you, alone, either pass or fail. Set 2 workers side by side to feel the difference. One retires in 1970 with a pension. He did nothing but show up for 30 years, and a check arrives every month until the day he dies, in good markets and bad, whether he lives to 70 or 95. The other retires today with a 401k. She had to decide how much to spare from every paycheck while raising a family, choose investments she was never taught to understand, guess how long she would live, and hope the market did not collapse the year she finally stopped working. Same country, same simple dream of a peaceful old age. But one of them was carried, and the other was handed the entire weight and wished good luck. Nothing about the second worker is lazier or less deserving. She was simply born into the years after the promise had quietly been withdrawn. That is the real answer to the question this all started with. How did people retire before the 401k? For most of history, they did not the way the word is meant today. They worked until they broke, or they leaned on family, or they ended in the poorhouse. Then, for a few short decades, a pension carried them, until the companies decided that promise was too expensive to keep. And what replaced it was not a better promise. It was no promise at all, handed to you dressed up as freedom. And notice the word that was chosen to sell it, because it matters. The change was never described as a company quietly stepping back from what it owed you. It was described as freedom, as choice, as finally putting you in control of your own money. There is a sliver of truth in that, but control and abandonment can look almost identical from a distance. Being handed the wheel is only freedom if someone first taught you how to drive, and for tens of millions of workers, no one ever did. Be honest about both systems, because neither one was ever the paradise that nostalgia paints. The old pension had real virtues, a guaranteed check and a company that carried the risk, but it was never universal, and it was never fair. It reached mostly men at large firms. It left out farmers, domestic workers, and enormous numbers of women and minorities entirely. And as the workers at Studebaker learned, it could evaporate the instant a company decided it could no longer pay. The 401k did fix some of that. It carries your own name. It follows you from job to job. No bankrupt employer can terminate it out from under you. Those are genuine improvements, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. But look hard at what was traded for them, because this is the part that should make you angry. The pension's great weakness was that it could be broken by one company. The 401k's weakness is that it can be broken by you, by a single bad decade in the market timed to your retirement, by one long stretch of unemployment, by nothing more than not knowing what no one ever taught you. One system could fail the worker. The other quietly requires the worker to never fail themselves, for 40 straight years, with no training, no guarantee, and no margin for a single serious mistake. And here is the part that should sit with you the longest. No one ever asked. No worker was handed a ballot. The single most important change to how Americans grow old in 100 years, the quiet dismantling of the pension and the handoff of all its risk to ordinary people, did not happen in a great public debate. It happened in tax code and in boardrooms, decided by accountants and executives. And the people it landed on were the very last to be told it had happened at all. The system that once carried the weight of your old age for you is gone, and it is not coming back. The pension your grandfather could lean on has been replaced by an account that leans entirely on you. No one at your company is quietly making sure you will be all right. No one in Washington is tracking whether your savings will last. That job, the the job of making sure you do not become the old man with three bad options, belongs to exactly one person now, and that person never volunteered for it. And the results of that experiment are visible everywhere you look. Study after study now finds that a large share of Americans approaching retirement have saved only a fraction of what they will need, and that millions are reaching their 60s with almost nothing set aside at all. That is not because those people are careless or foolish. It is because the entire weight of a problem that used to be shared, carried partly by companies and partly by the government, was shifted onto individuals who were never trained to bear it, and very often were never even told the load was now theirs. And that is why understanding how any of this works is no longer optional. For most of American history, growing old with dignity was a matter of luck, or family, or the mercy of a company that could change its mind. Today, it is a matter of what you know, and what you do while you still have time to act. The safety net did not just shrink, it was quietly handed to you to weave yourself. The old man in the coal town in 1930 had three options, and none of them were in his control. You were handed something he never had, and never asked for. The tools exist and the years are there, but the entire burden of using them was set on your shoulders without your consent, dropped there quietly by people who moved on long ago. No one is coming to lift it back off. The only thing worse than carrying that weight is not knowing it was ever placed on you.